The music had not even finished when Elira Voss saw him disappear through the side door with another woman. She stood at the center of the Packlands hall, candlelight glowing against the high stone walls, her white gown catching every flicker of gold. In minutes, she would be crowned Luna. The pack elders were already lining up. The silver circlet meant to sit upon her head waited on a velvet cushion nearby. This was supposed to be the happiest night of her life. Instead, her eyes followed her mate, Alpha Draven Cole, as he slipped away from the crowd with practiced ease, his hand briefly touching the small of a woman's back before the door closed behind them both. Elira knew that woman. Everyone in the pack did. Celine Marsh. Draven's past. A past he had promised, many times, was buried and gone. Her heart pounded, but her face stayed calm. She had learned, over the last 2 years bonded to Draven, how to keep her expression steady, even when something inside her cracked. Tonight was no different. She smiled at the elders, accepted their warm words, and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Nova, her younger sister, appeared at her side, her eyes scanning the room the way Elira's had moments before. "Where is he?" Nova whispered, careful to keep her voice low enough that only Elira could hear. "Pack business," Elira answered, the lie sliding out smoother than she expected. Nova's brows pulled together. She did not believe it, and she did not pretend to. Pack business doesn't leave lipstick on a collar. Elira's stomach turned, but she said nothing. She had not seen the lipstick herself, not yet. She would, only a few minutes later, when Draven returned to the hall, straightening his jacket, greeting the elders with the confident smile that had first made her fall for him. A faint smear of red sat just beneath his collarbone, barely visible unless someone was looking closely. Elira was looking closely. She had spent the better part of 2 years learning every detail of this man, the way his jaw tightened when he lied, the way his eyes shifted just slightly to the left when he was hiding something. Tonight, both signs were there, plain as daylight, and yet the ceremony continued as if nothing at all had happened. The elder in charge of the crowning, a stern gray-haired woman named Constance, lifted the circlet from its cushion and asked Elira to kneel. The crowd's attention turned fully toward her now, all eyes on the young woman about to become their Luna. Elira knelt, back straight, the fabric of her gown pooling around her like moonlight on water. Draven stepped forward, his role in the ceremony required by tradition, and placed his hand over hers as the elder lowered the circlet onto her head. The crowd erupted into soft cheers, warm applause rolling through the hall. Elira rose to her feet as their new Luna, silver metal cool against her hairline, and looked directly at her mate. He smiled at her, that same easy, practiced smile. She smiled back, and inside, something quiet and important finally, completely, broke. The celebration continued for hours after that. Elira danced when she was expected to dance. She spoke with visiting alphas and their mates, accepted congratulations, laughed at jokes that were not particularly funny. She played her part perfectly, the way she always did, because that was what a good Luna was supposed to do. Smile, perform. Hold the pack together, even when her own foundation felt like it was crumbling beneath her. It was well past midnight, when the hall finally emptied, and Elira found herself alone in the private chamber she now shared with Draven, as his official Luna. She sat at the edge of the bed, still in her gown, staring at her own reflection in the tall mirror across the room. The silver circlet still rested on her head, catching the low candlelight. She looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, a Luna, a partner, a symbol of unity for the pack. She did not feel like any of those things. Draven entered the room a few minutes later, loosening his collar, looking pleased with how the night had gone. "The elders loved the ceremony," he said, not quite meeting her eyes, as he moved toward the small table where a bottle of wine waited. "Constance said it was one of the finest crownings she's witnessed in decades." "Where did you go?" Elira asked, her voice quiet but steady. Draven paused, only for a second, before pouring the wine. "When?" "During the ceremony. You left for almost 20 minutes." "Pack business," he said, echoing the same lie Elira had already offered Nova. "One of the border patrols radioed in. I had to handle it." Elira watched him carefully, His jaw was tight. His eyes did not meet hers. "With Celine?" she asked. The room went still. Draven set the wine bottle down with more force than necessary, the glass clinking against the wooden table. "She was there. Yes. She's still part of this pack, Alira. I can't avoid her forever." "That's not what I asked. What are you accusing me of?" His voice sharpened, defensive in a way that told her more than any explanation could have. "Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. Can we not do this right now?" Alira felt the familiar pull to back down, to smooth things over the way she always did, to protect the peace of the pack even at the cost of her own peace. But something in her, something that had been slowly hardening for months, refused to bend this time. "There was lipstick on your collar," she said simply. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm telling you what I saw." Draven's expression flickered, just for a moment, before he composed himself again. "It's nothing. She hugged me. That's all it was." Alira did not answer. She simply looked at him, letting the silence stretch long enough that he shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "I'm tired," she finally said. "It's been a long night." She removed the circlet carefully and set it on the table beside the bed, then changed out of her gown behind the privacy screen in the corner of the room. When she returned, Draven was already lying down, his back to her, his breathing slow and even, though she suspected he was not actually asleep. Alira lay beside him, but did not sleep for a long time. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the last 2 years of her life, the way Draven had pursued her with such intensity at first, the way the pack had celebrated their bond, the promises he had made about leaving his past behind. She thought about all the small moments since then that she had chosen to explain away. Late meetings that ran too long, messages he closed quickly when she entered the room, the way Celine always seemed to be nearby whenever pack gatherings were held, even though her formal duties did not require it. She had ignored these things because she loved him, because she believed in the bond they were supposed to share, because leaving felt impossible when your entire identity had become tied to being someone's mate. But tonight, kneeling in front of the entire pack, while lipstick sat fresh on his collar, something had shifted. She was no longer willing to explain it away. The following morning, Alira woke before Draven, dressed quietly, and made her way to the eastern garden, where Nova was already waiting, 2 cups of tea in her hands. The morning air was cool, the sun just beginning to rise over the tree line, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. "You didn't sleep," Nova said, handing her sister one of the cups. "Not really." "Did you talk to him?" Alira wrapped her hands around the warm cup, staring out at the garden without really seeing it. "He said it was nothing. A hug. Pack business that just happened to require 20 minutes alone with his ex." Nova's jaw tightened. She had never liked Draven, not really, though she had kept most of her opinions to herself, out of respect for her sister's choices. "And you believe him?" "I don't know what I believe anymore," Alira admitted. "I keep thinking about everything from the last 2 years. All the times I told myself I was imagining things, or overreacting, or being paranoid. What if I wasn't imagining any of it?" Nova sat down on the stone bench beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You're the smartest person I know. If your instincts are telling you something is wrong, it's because something is wrong." Alira closed her eyes, letting the morning air settle around her. "I'm the Luna now, Nova. I can't just walk away because of a feeling. The pack depends on unity between Alpha and Luna. If I make accusations without proof, I could tear this whole community apart. So find proof," Nova said simply. "You deserve to know the truth, whatever it is." The words settled into Alira's chest, quiet but firm, like a decision she had already made without realizing it. She thought of Draven's tight jaw, his shifting eyes, the way he had refused to fully answer her question the night before. She thought of the silver circlet resting on her nightstand, a symbol of a partnership that was supposed to be built on trust. If that trust was already broken, she needed to know for certain, not just suspect it in the quiet corners of her mind. Over the following days, Alira began paying closer attention to details she had previously let slide past her. She noticed when Draven's phone buzzed, and he silenced it immediately, sliding it into his pocket without checking who had messaged him. She noticed how often his schedule now included meetings that required him to be away from the main pack house, meetings that were never fully explained. She noticed the way certain pack members, particularly those closest to Celine, would go quiet whenever Elira entered a room, as if they were hiding something they did not want her to overhear. She said nothing about any of it. Instead, she watched and waited, and quietly began keeping track of every inconsistency she found. At the same time, she continued performing her duties as Luna, with the same grace and dedication she always had. She visited pack families who needed support. She settled small disputes between neighbors. She organized supply distributions for the coming season. If anyone in the pack sensed that something was wrong in her marriage, they did not see it reflected in her work. Elira made certain of that. But privately, the cracks were widening. Every quiet dinner with Draven felt more like a performance than a partnership. Every time he reached for her hand across the table, she found herself wondering what his other hand had touched earlier that day. Every smile he gave her felt slightly less real than the one before it. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the crowning ceremony, Elira found herself standing outside Draven's private study, having come to ask him about a scheduling conflict for the following week. The door was slightly ajar, and before she could knock, she heard his voice from inside, low and urgent, clearly speaking to someone on the phone. "I told you, not here," he was saying. "Not with Elira around. We'll figure something out." Elira froze, her hand hovering just inches from the door. "I know what I promised her," Draven continued, his voice tightening with frustration. "But you know this isn't that simple. It never has been." She did not hear the rest. She could not make herself stay and listen any longer. Instead, she stepped back quietly, careful not to let the floorboards creak beneath her feet, and walked away before he could realize she had heard anything at all. That night, lying beside him in the dark, Elira stared at the ceiling and made a decision. She would not confront him yet, not until she had something solid, something undeniable, but she would find it. She owed herself that much, after everything she had given to this bond, after every year she had spent believing in a partnership that might have been built on nothing more than convenient lies. The Luna crown on her nightstand no longer felt like an honor. It felt like a weight she was beginning to question whether she wanted to carry at all. The weeks that followed the crowning ceremony moved slowly for Elira, each day stretching longer than the one before it. She continued her duties as Luna, with the same outward composure she always carried, but underneath that composure, she was building something quiet and deliberate, a record, a collection of every inconsistency, every unexplained absence, every small piece of evidence that something in her marriage had gone deeply wrong. She kept a plain notebook hidden inside a drawer in her private study, the kind no one would think twice about if they happened to see it lying around. In it, she wrote dates, times, and short observations. The evening Draven claimed to be meeting with Border Patrol leaders, though none of the patrol leaders she later spoke with recalled any such meeting. The afternoon his phone rang 3 times in a row, each call silenced before he even glanced at the screen. The way Celine Marsh had been assigned, quite conveniently, to oversee pack supply logistics, a role that placed her in frequent contact with Draven, despite having little to do with her previous position in the pack. None of these things, taken alone, proved anything. Together, they painted a picture Elira did not want to see, but could no longer ignore. Her sister Nova remained her only confidant during this time. They met most mornings in the Eastern Garden, sharing tea before the rest of the pack house woke, using those quiet hours to speak freely, without fear of being overheard. "You look tired," Nova said one morning, studying her sister's face carefully. "More tired than usual." "I haven't been sleeping well," Elira admitted, wrapping both hands around her teacup for warmth. "Every time I close my eyes, I keep replaying conversations, trying to figure out what I missed, what I ignored." "You didn't ignore anything," Nova said firmly. "You trusted him. That's different from being careless." Elira allowed herself a small, tired smile. "I appreciate you saying that, but trust that gets abused this many times starts to look a lot like carelessness, at least from where I'm standing." Nova reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. "What's your plan? You can't keep collecting notes forever, Elira. Eventually you'll have to decide what to do with what you find." "I know," Elira said quietly. "I'm not ready yet. Not until I have something undeniable, something he can't explain away with another excuse." She did not have to wait much longer. 3 days later, Elira was asked to attend a PAC council meeting regarding the upcoming trade agreement with a neighboring territory. Draven was expected to attend as well, but a sudden matter with the Eastern Border Patrol called him away just before the meeting began, leaving Elira to represent the PAC's interests on her own. She did not mind. She had grown accustomed to managing PAC business independently, and the council members respected her judgment as much as they respected Draven's. The meeting ran longer than expected, stretching well into the evening. By the time it concluded, most of the PAC house had gone quiet, the halls dim except for the occasional lantern left burning near the main entrance. Elira made her way toward her study, intending to review the notes from the meeting before retiring for the night, when she noticed light spilling from beneath the door of Draven's private office at the far end of the corridor. She had assumed he was still away handling border matters. Curious, and perhaps a little suspicious after everything she had observed over the past weeks, she approached quietly. The door was not fully closed. Through the narrow gap, she could see Draven standing near his desk, and across from him, close enough that their conversation would have been private in any normal circumstance, stood Celine Marsh. Elira did not move. She did not make a sound. She simply stood in the shadow of the hallway and listened. "You can't keep doing this to me," Celine was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "You made promises, Draven, before all of this happened, before her." "I know what I said," Draven replied, his voice lower, more controlled, though there was an unmistakable weariness beneath it. "Things are different now. I have responsibilities I didn't have before." "Responsibilities," Celine repeated, something bitter creeping into her tone. "Is that what we're calling it? You crowned her in front of the entire PAC, Draven. You stood there and let everyone believe you'd moved on completely." "I need you to be patient," Draven said. "I never stopped caring about you. That hasn't changed. But I can't just walk away from my position, from the alliance her family brings to this PAC. You know how important that is right now." Elira's chest tightened painfully at those words, each one landing like a small, precise blow. He had not denied it. He had not corrected Celine's assumption that something was still happening between them. Instead, he had spoken about patience, about timing, about the political value her own family connection brought to his position as alpha. She was not a partner to him. She was an asset. Celine's voice softened slightly, though the frustration remained clear beneath it. "I'm tired of being the secret, Draven. I'm tired of pretending in front of the PAC that we're nothing to each other." "I know," Draven said. "Give me time. Once things settle, once the trade agreements are finalized and the alliance is secure, we'll figure something out. I promise." Elira had heard enough. She stepped back from the door as quietly as she had approached it, her footsteps silent against the stone floor, and made her way back to her own study without looking back. Once inside, she closed the door and pressed her back against it, her breathing shallow and unsteady for the first time in weeks. There it was. The undeniable proof she had been searching for, delivered not through careful investigation, but through simple, painful coincidence. Draven had never truly ended things with Celine. He had simply hidden them well enough that Elira had been able to convince herself, time and time again, that her suspicions were unfounded. She sat down at her desk and opened the plain notebook where she had recorded her observations over the past weeks. For a long moment, she simply stared at the pages, at all the small pieces of evidence that now formed a complete and devastating picture. Then, with a steady hand that surprised even her, she wrote down everything she had just heard, word for word, as accurately as she could remember it. When she finished, she closed the notebook and sat quietly in the dim candlelight of her study, allowing herself, finally, to feel the full weight of what she had learned. She did not cry, she had expected to, but the tears did not come. Instead, she felt something colder settle over her, something that felt less like heartbreak and more like clarity. For 2 years, she had given everything to this bond, believing in a partnership built on mutual respect and honesty. Instead, she had been a political convenience, a means to secure an alliance, while the man she loved continued a relationship with someone else entirely. The Luna crown she had accepted with such hope only weeks earlier now felt like a costume, a role she had been cast in without ever truly understanding the script. Elira did not confront Draven that night. She was too exhausted, too raw from what she had overheard, to trust herself with a conversation that important. Instead, she returned to their shared chamber, lay down beside him, when he finally returned close to midnight, smelling faintly of the cold night air from his supposed border patrol duties, and said nothing at all. She simply watched him settle into sleep beside her, his breathing slow and undisturbed, entirely unaware that his Luna now knew the full truth of what he had been hiding. The next morning, Elira rose before dawn once again and made her way to the eastern garden, where Nova was waiting with the same 2 cups of tea she always brought. "You found something," Nova said immediately, reading the change in her sister's expression before Elira had even spoken a word. Elira nodded slowly, sitting down on the familiar stone bench. "I heard them talking, Draven and Celine." He told her to be patient, that once the trade alliance was secure, they would figure something out. Nova's face went pale with anger. "He said that? Directly?" "Word for word," Elira confirmed, her voice steady despite the storm still churning beneath her calm exterior. "He never ended it, Nova. He's been managing both of us this entire time. Me as his Luna, for the alliance my family brings to the pack, and her, as whatever she's always been to him." "I'm so sorry," Nova said quietly, reaching for her sister's hand. Elira allowed herself a moment to simply breathe, to let the cool morning air settle the last of her nerves before she spoke again. "I'm done being sorry for trusting him. I'm done making excuses for things I already knew, deep down, were wrong. What are you going to do?" Elira looked out over the quiet garden, watching the first rays of sunlight break through the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. For the first time in weeks, her mind felt clear, free of the doubt and confusion that had clouded her judgment since the night of the crowning ceremony. "I'm going to need proof he can't argue with," she said finally. "Not just what I heard, but something undeniable. Messages, records, anything that shows exactly how long this has been going on, and exactly what he's been telling her." "And then?" Elira met her sister's eyes, a quiet determination settling into her expression that Nova had not seen in a very long time. "And then I'm going to decide, on my own terms, whether I want to keep wearing a crown that was never truly mine to begin with." Finding proof turned out to be easier than Elira expected, though not because Draven had grown careless. It was because Celine had grown reckless. 3 days after Elira overheard the conversation in Draven's study, a young pack member named Grace, who worked in the supply logistics office alongside Celine, approached Elira with a hesitant expression, clearly unsure whether she should be speaking at all. "My Luna," Grace said quietly, glancing around the corridor to make certain no one else was nearby. "I don't mean to overstep, but I think you should know something." Elira paused, giving the young woman her full attention. "What is it, Grace?" "Celine left her tablet unlocked in the supply office yesterday. I wasn't looking for anything, I promise, but there were messages open on the screen. Messages between her and the Alpha." Grace hesitated, twisting her hands together nervously. "They didn't look like pack business messages, my Luna. I thought you deserved to know, even if it isn't my place to say anything." Elira felt her pulse quicken, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "Thank you for telling me, Grace. I won't forget this." That evening, Elira made her way to the supply logistics office under the pretense of reviewing inventory records for the upcoming trade agreement, a task well within her responsibilities as Luna. Celine was not present, having left for the day, and the office itself was quiet, lit only by a single lamp near the filing cabinets. Elira did not have to search long. Celine's tablet sat on the desk exactly where Grace had described, and though it was now locked, Elira remembered something Draven had once mentioned in passing, months earlier, about pack devices being registered under a shared administrative system for security purposes. As Luna, she technically had access to that system, though she had never once used it. Trusting her position had never required such measures before. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the administrative panel on her own device and located Celine's registered tablet within the system. She hesitated only a moment before proceeding. Whatever guilt she felt about the invasion of privacy was quickly outweighed by 2 years of quiet betrayal she had endured without ever fully understanding its scope. The messages, once she gained access, told a story far more complete and far more damning than anything she had overheard through a partially closed door. There were messages dating back nearly 18 months, long before Alira and Draven's official crowning ceremony had even been planned. Messages discussing meetings disguised as pack business. Messages where Draven reassured Celine that the bond with Alira was, in his own words, necessary for the pack, not permanent in the way it looks. Messages where he promised that once the political value of the alliance had been secured, arrangements could be made to quietly separate from Alira without damaging the pack's standing among its allies. Alira read every single message, her chest growing tighter with each new revelation. This was not a moment of weakness, not a single mistake made in confusion or temptation. This was a carefully constructed plan, sustained over more than a year, in which she had never been anything more than a means to an end. She photographed every relevant message using her own device, careful to capture dates and timestamps clearly, building a record that would leave no room for denial or excuse. When she finished, she returned Celine's tablet to exactly where she had found it, and left the office as quietly as she had entered. That night, Alira did not sleep at all. She sat in her private study, long after Draven had gone to bed, reviewing the photographs she had taken, cross-referencing them with the notes in her plain notebook, building a timeline so complete and so clear that no explanation Draven could offer would be able to withstand it. By the time morning arrived, she had made her decision, though she was not yet ready to act on it fully. She needed one more piece of information first, something that had nothing to do with Draven's betrayal and everything to do with her own future. She needed to understand exactly what leaving would cost her, and whether she had any real options once she did. Alira spent the following days quietly researching pack law regarding Luna titles and marriage bonds, careful to keep her inquiries subtle enough that word would not reach Draven before she was ready. She learned that a Luna could formally renounce her title before the full council, though doing so would require public justification strong enough to satisfy the elders, given the significant political and social consequences such a renouncement would carry for the pack's standing. She also learned, through careful conversation with Nova and a trusted family advisor named Edmund, who had served her parents for many years, that her family's alliance with Draven's pack had been built on specific trade agreements that could, in theory, be renegotiated or withdrawn if the personal bond between the two packs was broken. In other words, Alira was not as powerless as she had feared. Her family carried real influence Draven had clearly valued enough to keep his relationship with Celine hidden, rather than risk losing it entirely. That realization brought her a strange sense of clarity. For 2 years, she had believed her value in this marriage was tied entirely to her role as Draven's mate, as though her identity had become fully absorbed into his. But the truth was far different. Her family's standing, her own reputation among the pack, her ability to manage difficult negotiations and support pack families through hardship, none of that depended on Draven at all. It had always been hers, entirely separate from him. She simply had not recognized it until now. Nearly 2 weeks after overhearing the conversation between Draven and Celine, Alira finally confronted her mate directly. She chose a private setting, their shared chamber, late in the evening after the rest of the pack house had gone quiet, wanting no witnesses and no distractions when she finally spoke the truth aloud. Draven was reviewing trade documents at the small desk near the window when Alira entered the room and closed the door firmly behind her. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm, but carrying a weight that immediately caught his attention. He looked up, setting his papers aside. "Is something wrong?" "I know about Celine," Alira said simply. "I know it never ended. I know you told her the bond between us was necessary, not permanent. I know you've been planning to quietly separate from me once the trade alliance with my family was secured." The color drained from Draven's face. For a long moment, he said nothing at all, his expression cycling through shock, then something close to panic, before finally settling into a defensive stillness. "Alira, whatever you think you know—" "I have proof," she interrupted, her voice steady despite the tremor she could feel building beneath her calm exterior. "Messages, dated back over a year. Your own words, Draven. I'm not asking you to explain, because there is no explanation that changes what I already know." He stood slowly, running a hand through his hair, clearly searching for some way to salvage the conversation. It's not what it looks like. Celine and I have history, yes, but the bond between us, between you and me, that's real. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't just hurt me, Alira said, her voice finally cracking, though not with tears, with something closer to controlled fury. You used me. You used my family's alliance to secure your position, all while planning to end this, the moment it was convenient for you. You let the entire pack believe in a partnership that never truly existed. Draven took a step toward her, his expression softening into something that might have looked like genuine regret, though Alira no longer trusted herself to judge whether it was real. Please, Alira, let's talk about this. We can fix it. There's nothing to fix, she said quietly. There was never anything real to begin with. She turned and left the room before he could say anything further, closing the door softly behind her, leaving him standing alone amid his scattered trade documents and the wreckage of a plan he had clearly believed would never unravel. Alira did not return to their shared chamber that night. Instead, she made her way to Nova's room, where her sister welcomed her without a single question, simply pulling her into a tight embrace, the moment she saw the look on Alira's face. You confronted him, Nova said softly. I did. And? Alira sat down heavily on the edge of Nova's bed, staring at her own hands, as though seeing them for the first time in weeks. He didn't deny it. He tried to explain, tried to soften it, but he didn't deny a single word. Nova sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. What happens now? Alira lifted her gaze, and for the first time since the crowning ceremony, something resembling resolve settled clearly into her expression. Now I decide what I want my future to look like, and it's not going to be built on lies anymore. News of the tension between the Luna and Alpha did not stay contained within the pack house for long, though Alira made every effort to keep the details private. By the time the neutral summit between the region's packs and kingdoms arrived, nearly 3 weeks after her confrontation with Draven, whispers had already begun circulating among the pack elders, though no one dared speak of it directly to Alira herself. The summit was held once every year, in a grand hall, built along the border between pack territory and the kingdom lands, a rare occasion when alphas, pack leaders, and rulers from the surrounding kingdoms gathered to discuss trade, borders, and alliances. Attendance was expected of every Luna and Alpha pair, regardless of personal circumstances, and Alira had no intention of giving the pack elders any additional reason for concern by skipping such an important event. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing a deep blue gown that carried none of the softness of the white dress she had worn at her crowning. She wore her Luna circlet, though it now felt more like armor than an honor, a symbol she maintained publicly while privately reconsidering everything it represented. Draven rode beside her during the journey to the summit hall, though the silence between them had grown so complete over the past weeks that conversation felt almost foreign. He had tried, several times since her confrontation, to explain himself further, to apologize, to ask for another chance. Alira had listened politely each time and offered nothing in return. She was no longer interested in explanations. She was simply gathering the strength and clarity needed to decide her next move. The summit hall itself was magnificent, built from pale stone with towering windows that let in streams of afternoon light. Long tables lined the perimeter of the room, each marked with the banners of the attending packs and kingdoms, while the center of the hall remained open for the formal discussions that would take place throughout the day. Alira took her seat beside Draven at the table marked with their pack's banner, exchanging polite greetings with the surrounding Alphas and Lunas as the summit began. The formal proceedings moved through trade discussions, border adjustments, and territorial disputes with the practiced efficiency of leaders who had attended dozens of similar meetings over the years. It was during a brief recess, as attendees mingled near the refreshment tables set along the hall's eastern wall, that Alira first noticed him. King Ashbourne Cade stood near the tall windows, speaking with quiet authority to a small group of visiting dignitaries. He was not a particularly tall man, nor an especially imposing one at first glance. Yet something about his presence commanded attention in a way Alira had rarely witnessed. His dark hair was cropped close, his posture perfectly controlled, and his expression carried none of the practiced warmth most leaders adopted for public gatherings. Instead, his face remained calm and unreadable, his dark eyes sharp and assessing as they moved across the room. Illyra had heard of King Ashbourne before, of course. Everyone had. He ruled a kingdom bordering the Packlands territory, a kingdom known for its strict discipline, its formidable military, and its ruler's reputation for dealing swiftly and decisively with anyone foolish enough to test his patience. Alphas, who had once considered testing the kingdom's borders, had quickly reconsidered, after learning what became of the last leader who had tried. Ashbourne Cade was not a man most were willing to provoke. "Careful," a voice said quietly beside her. Illyra turned to find Nova, who had accompanied her to the summit as part of the pack's official delegation, following her gaze toward the king. "You're staring." "I'm not staring," Illyra said, though she quickly looked away, feeling a faint warmth rise to her cheeks. "I've just never seen him this close before. Word is he's here to discuss a trade route through the northern territories," Nova said, lowering her voice further. "Apparently he doesn't attend these summits often. Whatever brought him here this year must be important." Illyra glanced back toward the king, only to find, to her surprise, that his gaze had shifted from the dignitaries he had been speaking with and now rested directly on her. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the crowded hall, and something in his expression, some flicker of quiet curiosity beneath the otherwise composed exterior, sent an unexpected jolt through her chest. She looked away first, unsettled by how easily he had caught her watching him. The recess ended shortly after, and the summit resumed its formal proceedings. Illyra did her best to focus on the discussions at hand, though she found her attention drifting more than once toward the far end of the hall, where King Ashbourne sat with quiet authority among his own delegation. It was not until much later in the day, during the closing reception held in the hall's adjoining courtyard, that Illyra found herself unexpectedly face to face with him. She had stepped away from the main gathering, seeking a moment of solitude near the courtyard's stone fountain, when a familiar sense of another presence caused her to turn. King Ashbourne stood a short distance away, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, watching her with the same quiet, assessing expression she had noticed earlier in the hall. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice low and measured, carrying none of the performative charm most leaders used in social settings. "You looked as though you needed a moment away from the noise." Illyra straightened slightly, surprised by his directness. "I did, actually. Thank you for noticing." "You're the Luna of the Eastern Pack," he said. Not quite a question, though he waited for her confirmation regardless. "Illyra Voss," she said, "and you're King Ashbourne Cade, though I suspect most everyone in this hall already knows that." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Reputation tends to precede me, for better or worse." "Mostly for worse, from what I've heard," Illyra said, then immediately wondered if she had spoken too boldly. To her surprise, however, the king's smile widened slightly, genuine amusement flickering behind his otherwise controlled expression. "An honest answer. I appreciate that more than you might expect." He studied her for a moment, his dark eyes carrying an intensity that felt entirely different from anything Illyra had grown used to in Draven's company. "Most people in these gatherings tell me only what they think I want to hear." "I find that exhausting, personally," Illyra admitted. "Pretending." Something shifted in Ashbourne's expression, a flicker of understanding that told her he had noticed more than she intended to reveal. "You seem tired, if you don't mind my saying so. Not from the summit itself, I think." Illyra hesitated, unsure how much to share with a man she had only just met, a king whose reputation for shrewd political calculation was well known throughout the region. Yet something about his directness made her want to answer honestly, a rare feeling given how carefully she had guarded her words over the past several weeks. "It's been a difficult season," she said simply, choosing her words with care. "Personal matters. Nothing that concerns kingdom business." Ashbourne nodded slowly, accepting her deflection without pressing further, though his gaze remained steady on hers. "If it ever does concern matters beyond the personal, my kingdom values honest alliances, not merely convenient ones." The words settled into Illyra's chest with unexpected weight, a quiet contrast to everything she had recently learned about her own marriage. built as it was on convenience rather than honesty. She studied the king carefully, searching for any sign that his words carried a hidden agenda, but found only calm, steady sincerity. "That's a rare quality to hear spoken so plainly," she said. "I find plain speech saves a great deal of time," Ashbourne replied. "Time I'd rather spend on matters that actually deserve my attention." Before Alira could respond, Draven's voice called out from across the courtyard, summoning her back toward the main gathering for a scheduled meeting with visiting trade representatives. She glanced toward the sound, then back to King Ashbourne, who inclined his head politely, his expression returning to its previous composed neutrality. "Duty calls, it seems," he said. "Perhaps we'll speak again before the summit concludes." "Perhaps," Alira said, offering a small, genuine smile, before turning to rejoin the main gathering. As she walked away, she could feel his gaze following her, though when she glanced back briefly over her shoulder, he had already turned to address another dignitary, approaching from the opposite direction, his composed authority fully restored. Still, something about the brief exchange lingered with her throughout the remainder of the summit. For the first time in weeks, someone had looked at her not as a political asset, not as a convenient alliance to be managed and eventually discarded, but as a person whose exhaustion and unspoken struggles were worth noticing. It was a small thing, perhaps insignificant in the grand scheme of the summit's formal proceedings. Yet as Alira sat beside Draven through the remainder of the evening's discussions, her mind kept drifting back to the calm, steady voice of a king every alpha in the region feared crossing, and the quiet honesty in his eyes when he had told her that his kingdom valued alliances built on truth rather than convenience. She did not yet know what to make of the feeling that conversation had left behind, but she suspected, as the summit drew to its close and the delegates began preparing for their journeys home, that it would not be the last time her path crossed with King Ashbourne Cade. Alira did not expect to hear from King Ashbourne again so soon after the summit concluded, yet less than a week after returning to the packhouse, a formal letter arrived bearing the seal of his kingdom, addressed directly to her rather than to Draven or the pack council as a whole. She opened it privately in her study, curious despite herself, and found the message brief but carefully worded. King Ashbourne requested a private meeting to discuss a matter of mutual interest regarding trade routes along the northern border, a subject that, while plausible enough on its surface, struck Alira as an unusual reason to request her presence specifically, rather than the pack's official trade representatives. She considered ignoring the request, or at the very least, delaying her response until she understood his true intentions. But curiosity, along with the lingering memory of their brief conversation in the summit courtyard, ultimately won out. She sent a reply agreeing to the meeting, choosing a neutral location, just inside the kingdom's border, where a small conference house had long been used for diplomatic discussions between the pack and the kingdom. She did not tell Draven the true nature of the meeting, only that it concerned trade discussions with the kingdom, a claim vague enough to be technically true, without revealing the personal curiosity that had truly driven her decision. The conference house sat at the edge of a quiet forest clearing, modest in size but elegantly furnished, clearly built with discretion in mind. When Alira arrived, King Ashbourne was already waiting, seated at a long wooden table near the room's tall windows, a small stack of documents spread before him. He rose as she entered, offering a polite nod. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't certain you would." "Curiosity got the better of me," Alira admitted, taking the seat across from him, "though I suspect trade routes aren't the real reason you asked me here." A faint smile crossed his face, there and gone quickly. "You're perceptive. I appreciate that you didn't pretend otherwise." "Then perhaps you should tell me the real reason," Alira said, folding her hands on the table before her. Ashbourne studied her for a long moment before speaking, his expression carrying the same careful consideration she remembered from their first conversation. "I've heard, through channels I won't bother pretending are entirely proper, that your bond with Alpha Cole has become strained. I don't say this to pry into matters that aren't my concern. I say it because I believe there may be an arrangement that benefits us both, should the rumors prove accurate." Alira felt her guard rise instinctively, though she kept her expression composed. "What kind of arrangement?" "A marriage alliance," Ashbourne said plainly, without hesitation or embarrassment. as though discussing nothing more significant than the trade routes his letter had claimed to address. Between myself and you, should you choose to end your current bond, my kingdom would benefit from a formal alliance with your family's territory, and you would gain protection, status, and freedom from a partnership that, from what I understand, no longer serves your interests. Whatever Alira had expected from this meeting, it had not been quite this direct. She sat back slightly, studying the king's calm, unreadable expression, searching for any sign of manipulation or deceit beneath his straightforward proposal. She found none, only the same steady honesty she had noticed at the summit. "You're proposing marriage," she said slowly, "as a business arrangement." "I'm proposing an alliance," Ashbourne corrected gently, "one built on mutual benefit and honest terms, rather than false promises dressed up as devotion. I won't pretend to offer you romance I don't yet feel, Alira, but I can offer you respect, security, and a partnership where you are never treated as a convenient asset to be discarded once your usefulness expires." The words struck closer to the truth of her situation than Alira had expected any outsider to understand, and she found herself momentarily unable to respond, caught between surprise at his bluntness and something else, something warmer, that she was not yet ready to examine closely. "How do you know so much about my situation?" she finally asked. "I make it my business to understand the alliances and tensions surrounding my kingdom's borders," Ashbourne said simply. "It wasn't difficult to notice the strain between you and Alpha Cole during the summit. The rest, I confirmed through careful inquiry afterward. I hope you don't consider that an overstep." "It's certainly forward," Alira said, though there was no real anger in her tone, only cautious consideration. "You're asking me to consider abandoning my current bond, my title, everything I've built within my pack, based on a single conversation and a formal letter." "I'm not asking you to decide today," Ashbourne said. "I'm simply presenting the option honestly, rather than leaving you to discover it through rumor or speculation. What you choose to do with that information is entirely your decision." Alira studied him for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. There was something deeply unfamiliar about being offered a choice so plainly, without manipulation or hidden agenda, after months of navigating a marriage built on exactly the opposite. Draven had always dressed his intentions in soft language, promises wrapped in affection that later proved hollow. Ashbourne offered no such softness, only clear terms and honest expectations. "Why me?" she asked finally. "You could form an alliance with any number of packs or kingdoms. Why propose this to someone whose current bond hasn't even formally ended?" Ashbourne considered the question carefully before answering. "Because during our conversation at the summit, you spoke with more honesty in a few minutes than most leaders manage in hours of formal negotiation. Because I suspect, based on what I've since learned, that you deserve a partnership built on more than convenience and quiet betrayal. And because, quite simply, I found myself thinking of that conversation more often than I expected to in the days since." The admission, quiet and understated as it was, carried more weight than any grand declaration could have. Alira felt something shift within her chest, a small, cautious warmth that she had not expected to feel again, so soon after everything Draven had shattered. "I need time," she said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make lightly, regardless of how strained things have become with Draven." "Of course," Ashbourne said, inclining his head respectfully. "Take whatever time you need. My offer remains open, without pressure or expectation, for as long as you require." They spoke for a while longer, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. The trade routes that had served as the meeting's official pretext, the differences between pack governance and kingdom rule, small observations about the surrounding forest visible through the conference house's tall windows. Alira found herself unexpectedly at ease in his presence, the careful performance she maintained around most people, including her own mate, gradually softening into something closer to genuine conversation. By the time she departed the conference house that afternoon, riding back toward the pack territory with Nova's guard escort waiting to accompany her, Alira's mind was a tangled mixture of caution and cautious hope. King Ashbourne's proposal was bold, unconventional, and entirely unexpected. Yet it offered something she had not realized she desperately needed, the possibility of a future built on honesty rather than quiet deception. She did not share the details of the meeting with Draven that evening, offering only vague confirmation that trade discussions had gone well. But later that night, alone in her study, she opened her plain notebook once more, no longer to record evidence of betrayal, but to begin weighing, carefully and deliberately, what her future might look like should she choose to accept the offer King Ashbourne Cade had so honestly presented. For the first time since the crowning ceremony that had once felt like the beginning of everything she wanted, Elira allowed herself to imagine a different kind of future entirely. One where she was chosen not out of convenience or political necessity, but because someone had genuinely seen her worth and valued it enough to speak the truth plainly, without hesitation or hidden agenda. It was a small seed of possibility, fragile and uncertain, but it was enough, for now, to help her finally believe that leaving Draven behind might not mean losing everything she had worked so hard to build. It might, instead, mean finally gaining the partnership she had always deserved. It took Elira nearly a month to make her final decision, though in truth, some part of her had already decided the moment she left the conference house after her conversation with King Ashbourne. The remaining weeks were spent quietly preparing, gathering the proof she had collected, consulting with her family's advisor Edmund about the legal steps required to formally renounce her title, and slowly, carefully, distancing herself from the daily routines that had once tied her so closely to Draven's side. Draven noticed the distance, of course. He attempted several more times to repair what had broken between them, offering apologies that grew increasingly desperate as the weeks passed, promising to end all contact with Celine, promising to prove his devotion in whatever way Elira required. She listened to each attempt with the same calm, unmoved patience she had maintained since her confrontation, offering neither forgiveness nor anger, only quiet distance that unsettled him far more than open conflict ever could have. He did not know, during those weeks, that Elira had already begun corresponding privately with King Ashbourne. Careful, measured letters exchanged through trusted messengers, each one helping her understand more clearly what a future built on honest partnership might actually look like. Ashbourne never pressured her, never demanded quick answers, allowing her the space to arrive at her own conclusions in her own time. That patience, more than anything else, convinced her that his offer had been genuine from the start. The formal council meeting, where Elira intended to renounce her Luna title, was scheduled for a clear autumn morning, nearly 6 weeks after the summit where she and Ashbourne had first properly spoken. She dressed carefully that day, choosing not the soft, hopeful white of her crowning gown, nor the deep blue she had worn to the summit, but a sharp, deliberate gray that carried none of the sentimentality of her previous choices. This was not a day for romance or nostalgia. It was a day for clarity. The council hall was full when she arrived, pack elders seated along the raised platform at the front of the room, ordinary pack members filling the rows of benches below, drawn by rumors that something significant was about to happen, though few understood exactly what. Draven sat in his customary place beside the empty seat reserved for the Luna, his expression carrying a mixture of confusion and growing unease, as he watched Elira walk toward the front of the hall, rather than take her usual place beside him. Constance, the stern elder who had placed the Luna circlet on Elira's head so many weeks earlier, rose to address the gathered crowd. The Luna has requested this council session to address a matter of significant importance to the pack's future. Elira Voss, you may speak. Elira stepped forward, removing the silver circlet from her head as she did, holding it carefully in both hands as she addressed the room. Her voice, when she spoke, carried none of the hesitation she had felt in private moments over the past weeks, only calm, steady resolve. 6 weeks ago, at my own crowning ceremony, I witnessed Alpha Draven Cole leave this very hall to meet privately with Celine Marsh, a relationship he had assured me, repeatedly, had ended before our bond began. A murmur rippled through the crowd, though Elira continued without pause. In the weeks since, I have gathered undeniable proof that this relationship never ended at all. Messages, dated back more than a year, in which the Alpha describes our bond as necessary for the pack's political standing, not permanent, and discusses plans to quietly separate from me once the trade alliance with my family was fully secured. Draven rose from his seat, his face pale with shock and rising panic. Elira, this isn't the place. This is exactly the place. Illyra said, her voice firm enough to silence him without raising in volume at all. I stood before this entire pack and accepted a crown built on trust I now know was never real. I will not continue wearing a title built on deception, regardless of the political consequences that decision carries. She turned back toward the council elders, holding the circlet out before her. I formally renounce my title as Luna of this pack. I release any claim to the bond between myself and Alpha Cole, and I ask that this council record the reasons for my decision accurately, so that no future Luna is asked to accept a crown built on the same false promises I once believed. The hall erupted into stunned murmurs, pack members turning to whisper urgently among themselves, elders exchanging grave glances along the raised platform. Constance rose slowly, her expression carrying a complicated mixture of sympathy and concern for what such a public renouncement would mean for the pack's standing among its allies. Illyra, Constance said carefully, renouncing your title carries significant consequences. Your family's alliance with this pack, the trade agreements built upon your bond with the Alpha. My family's alliance was never truly built on my bond with Draven, Illyra interrupted gently but firmly. It was built on mutual respect between two families who valued honest partnership. That respect no longer exists here, not from the Alpha's side. I trust my family will understand and support my decision. She glanced toward Draven, who stood frozen at the front of the hall, his expression a mixture of humiliation and dawning realization at exactly what he stood to lose. It was not simply Illyra herself, though that loss alone would have been significant. It was the alliance her family represented, the trade agreements that had strengthened the pack's position among its neighbors, the respect Illyra herself had cultivated among pack members through years of dedicated service, all of it now walking away from him in a single, decisive moment. "You can't do this," Draven said quietly, though the words carried more desperation than authority. "Illyra, please. Whatever I've done wrong, we can fix this. The pack needs unity right now, not division." "The pack needed honesty," Illyra replied, her voice softening slightly, though her resolve did not waver. "You had the chance to offer that, many times over, and chose deception instead. I won't continue paying the price for that choice." She set the silver circlet down carefully on the small table positioned at the front of the council platform, a formal gesture the elders would recognize as the official completion of her renouncement. Then, without waiting for further discussion or debate, she turned and walked out of the council hall, her steps steady despite the weight of the stunned silence following behind her. Nova met her just outside the hall's main entrance, having watched the proceedings from a side entrance reserved for family members. She wrapped Illyra in a tight embrace the moment she stepped outside, saying nothing at first, simply offering the quiet support Illyra had needed throughout the entire ordeal. "You did it," Nova finally said, pulling back slightly to study her sister's face. "How do you feel?" Illyra considered the question carefully, surprised to find that the answer came easily. "Lighter," she said. "Free, in a way I haven't felt in a very long time." Inside the hall, the council session continued in her absence, though Illyra would later learn the details secondhand from Nova and Edmund, who remained to observe the immediate aftermath. Draven, humiliated in front of the entire pack, attempted to salvage what remained of his standing, insisting the pack's alliances would remain secure despite Illyra's departure. But the elders, along with the gathered pack members, understood clearly what had truly been lost. Not merely a Luna, but the trust and stability her presence had provided, along with the valuable political connections her family's alliance had once guaranteed. Celine, present among the gathered crowd, had reportedly gone pale and silent throughout Illyra's address, quickly disappearing from the hall before the session concluded, unwilling to face the scrutiny, now turned squarely toward her role in the entire situation. For Illyra, the days following her formal renouncement passed in a strange, quiet blur. She moved out of the private chamber she had shared with Draven, relocating temporarily to Nova's quarters while she finalized plans for her departure from the pack entirely. Pack members she had once considered close friends offered mixed reactions, some expressing quiet support for her decision, others clearly uncomfortable with the disruption her choice had caused to the pack's carefully maintained political stability. Illyra did not concern herself much with their reactions. She had spent 2 years carefully managing everyone else's expectations, smoothing over conflicts, maintaining a peaceful facade, even as her own foundation crumbled beneath her. She was finished doing that now. 10 days after the council session, she sent a formal letter to King Ashbourne Cade, informing him of her decision to fully end her bond with Draven, and expressing her interest in further discussing the alliance he had proposed weeks earlier. His response arrived within days, warm, despite its characteristic brevity, welcoming her decision and expressing genuine anticipation for what their future partnership might hold. As Alira prepared to leave the Pact territory that had been her home for so many years, she found herself reflecting on the crown she had once accepted with such hope and excitement. It had never truly been hers, she realized now. It had been Draven's tool, a symbol he had used to secure alliances and maintain appearances while pursuing an entirely different life behind closed doors. Whatever crown awaited her next, if any at all, she was determined it would be built on something far more solid than convenient appearances. It would be built on truth, chosen freely, rather than accepted out of naive hope and misplaced trust. The journey to King Ashbourne's kingdom took 2 full days by carriage, winding through forested hills and quiet farmland that gradually gave way to the taller stone architecture and organized streets that marked the kingdom's territory. Alira traveled with a small escort, along with Nova, who had insisted on accompanying her sister for at least the first weeks of her new life, unwilling to let Alira face such a significant transition entirely alone. The kingdom itself felt different from the Pact territory, in ways Alira had not fully anticipated. Where the Pack House had always carried a certain organic warmth, communal gathering spaces filled with the constant movement of Pack members going about their daily lives, the kingdom's central palace felt more structured, more formal, its wide stone corridors and high vaulted ceilings speaking to centuries of careful governance, rather than the close-knit familiarity of Pack life. King Ashbourne met her personally at the palace's main entrance, a gesture Alira understood, from the surprised murmurs among his own staff, was not typical for a ruler of his standing. He wore simple, well-tailored dark clothing, rather than the ceremonial attire she had seen him in at the summit, and his expression, though still carrying its characteristic composure, softened slightly as she approached. "Welcome," he said, extending a hand to help her down from the carriage. "I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "Long, but manageable," Alira replied, accepting his hand briefly, before stepping down onto the palace's wide stone steps. "Thank you for arranging everything so quickly." "It was the least I could do," Ashbourne said, his gaze shifting briefly to Nova as she followed her sister down from the carriage. "And you must be Nova. Alira has mentioned you in her letters. Welcome to my kingdom as well." Nova offered a polite nod, though Alira could see her sister studying the king carefully, weighing his character with the same protective scrutiny she had applied to every significant decision in Alira's life since their parents had passed years earlier. "Thank you for your hospitality, Your Majesty. Please, simply Ashbourne will do, at least in private settings," he said, a faint, genuine warmth touching his expression. "Formality has its place, but I'd rather not maintain it constantly within my own walls." He personally guided them through the palace's main halls, pointing out various rooms and their purposes, with the same careful, measured explanations Alira remembered from their earlier conversations. The palace, while formal in its architecture, carried a quiet sense of order and stability that Alira found unexpectedly comforting after the emotional turbulence of the past several weeks. Her private chambers, prepared well before her arrival, were spacious and elegantly furnished, though not extravagant in the way she might have expected from a kingdom of Ashbourne's standing. Tall windows overlooked a quiet garden below, filled with neatly arranged flower beds, and a small fountain positioned at its center. "I hope this suits you," Ashbourne said as he showed her into the room. "If you'd prefer different arrangements, they can easily be changed." "It's lovely," Alira said honestly, moving toward the window to take in the view of the garden below. "Thank you, Ashbourne, for all of this." "You don't need to thank me for basic hospitality," he said, though something in his tone suggested he appreciated the sentiment regardless. "This is your home now, for as long as you choose it to be. I want you to feel that clearly, not merely hear it stated." Over the following days, Illyra gradually settled into the rhythms of palace life, learning the names of the kingdom's staff, familiarizing herself with the formal customs that governed daily interactions within Ashbourne's court. It was different from pack life in nearly every way, more structured, more deliberate, yet she found a certain peace in the clarity of it all, a stark contrast to the constant emotional uncertainty that had defined her final months within Draven's pack. Ashbourne, true to the honest character he had displayed since their first conversation, gave her considerable space during those early days, never pressuring her toward any particular pace in their developing relationship. They shared meals together most evenings, conversations ranging from kingdom governance to lighter topics, books they had both read, memories from childhood, small observations about the world around them that gradually built a foundation of genuine familiarity between them. "You seem more at ease today," Ashbourne observed one evening, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival, as they sat together in the palace's smaller dining hall, a space reserved for private meals rather than formal court functions. "I feel more at ease," Illyra admitted, setting down her fork as she considered the observation further. "I hadn't realized how much energy I was spending, back at the pack house, simply managing appearances. Here, I don't feel that same pressure." "You never have to perform for my benefit," Ashbourne said simply. "I'd rather know the truth of how you're feeling, even when it isn't particularly pleasant, than watch you exhaust yourself maintaining a pleasant facade." Illyra studied him carefully across the table, appreciating, not for the first time, how consistently he lived up to the honest character he had presented from their very first conversation. "You keep surprising me," she said. "Every time I expect some hidden agenda, some catch to all of this generosity, you simply continue being exactly what you claimed to be from the start." "I told you honesty saves time," Ashbourne said, a faint smile touching his expression. "It also, I've found, builds far more durable partnerships than convenient pretending ever could." Their conversations gradually deepened over the following weeks, moving beyond polite familiarity into something that felt, to Illyra's quiet surprise, genuinely warm. Ashbourne's reputation throughout the region, that of a cold, formidable ruler who inspired fear among alphas and kingdoms alike, revealed itself, in private moments, to be only one facet of a far more complex character. He was patient with his staff, thoughtful in his governance decisions, and possessed a dry, understated humor that Illyra found herself looking forward to discovering more of, with each passing conversation. At the same time, he remained fiercely protective of his kingdom's interests, a trait that became particularly clear one afternoon, when word arrived from the Packlands territory regarding growing instability within Draven's leadership following Illyra's departure. "Several of the Pack's trade partners have begun quietly withdrawing their agreements," Ashbourne informed her, reviewing a report delivered by one of his advisors during their evening meal. "Your family's alliance carried more weight than Alpha Cole apparently realized. Without it, other packs are reconsidering their own commitments to his territory." Illyra absorbed this news with a complicated mixture of feelings, not quite satisfaction, but perhaps something close to quiet vindication, after everything she had endured. "I imagine that's causing him considerable difficulty." "Considerable," Ashbourne confirmed, setting the report aside. "Though I want to be clear, Illyra, that whatever difficulties Alpha Cole faces going forward are consequences of his own choices, not something I intend to actively worsen out of personal spite. My kingdom has no interest in unnecessary conflict with the Packlands, provided they respect our borders and existing agreements." "That's fair," Illyra said, appreciating his measured approach even in matters that could have easily justified a more aggressive response. "I don't want revenge, exactly. I just want the truth to finally matter, after everything." "It matters," Ashbourne said simply. "It always has, even when it felt otherwise." As the weeks progressed, Illyra found herself gradually stepping into a more active role within the kingdom's daily governance, offering her insight on matters related to trade and diplomacy, drawing on the skills she had developed during her years managing pack affairs. Ashbourne welcomed her involvement genuinely, consulting her opinion on various decisions with a respect that felt entirely different from the token deference Draven had occasionally offered, while ultimately making decisions without her input. Nova, having observed the growing partnership between her sister and the king over several weeks, eventually approached Illyra privately one evening, her expression carrying a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. "I was worried when you first told me about his proposal," Nova admitted, settling into the small sitting room adjoining Alira's private chambers. "It felt too sudden, too convenient, after everything that happened with Draven. I didn't want you rushing into another arrangement built on someone else's agenda." "I worried about that too, honestly," Alira said. "But it's different here, Nova. He's never once asked me to be anything other than exactly who I am. No performance required." Nova studied her sister carefully, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her earlier caution. "You seem happy, genuinely happy, not just relieved to be away from the pack." Alira considered the observation, surprised to find how easily she could confirm it. "I am," she said. "I didn't expect to feel this way so soon, especially after everything with Draven. But being here, being seen honestly, rather than managed for someone else's convenience, it's changed something in me." "Good," Nova said firmly. "You deserve that, more than anyone I know." Later that evening, as Alira stood alone at the window of her private chambers, watching the moonlight settle over the quiet palace garden below, she found herself reflecting on how dramatically her circumstances had shifted in the span of just a few months. From the devastating betrayal she had discovered at her own crowning ceremony, to the quiet, deliberate strength it had taken to walk away from a life built on false promises, to this unexpected new beginning within Ashbourne's kingdom, built not on desperate hope, but on honest, steady partnership. She did not yet know exactly what the future held, whether this growing connection with Ashbourne would develop into something even deeper, or whether their alliance would remain, for now, a practical arrangement built on mutual respect. But for the first time in a very long while, Alira found herself looking forward to discovering the answer, rather than fearing it. The letter arrived on a quiet morning, nearly 2 months after Alira's arrival at the kingdom, delivered by a messenger wearing the Packlands insignia, requesting a formal audience between Alpha Draven Cole and King Ashbourne Cade. Ashbourne reviewed the request over breakfast, his expression giving little away, as he passed the letter across the table for Alira to read. "He wants to discuss what he's calling a matter of significant regional importance," Alira said, scanning the carefully worded request. "That's vague enough to mean almost anything. I suspect I know exactly what he intends to discuss," Ashbourne said, his voice carrying a note of quiet resignation rather than surprise. "His pack's standing has continued deteriorating since your departure. Several more trade agreements have collapsed in recent weeks. I imagine he's grown desperate enough to attempt some form of negotiation, likely involving you directly." Alira set the letter down, a familiar tension settling into her shoulders, despite the months of distance she had gained from Draven, and everything associated with her previous life. "You think he wants me to come back?" "I think he wants whatever will restore his pack's standing most efficiently," Ashbourne said honestly. "Whether that involves you personally, or simply leveraging our growing alliance for his own benefit, I can't say for certain until we hear him out." "Do we have to grant the audience?" Alira asked, though she already suspected the answer. "We don't have to do anything," Ashbourne said, "but refusing outright might invite further complications down the line. I'd rather understand exactly what he's planning, on our terms, in a setting where I can ensure your comfort and safety throughout." Alira considered this for a long moment, before nodding slowly. "All right, but I want to be present. I'm not interested in hiding from whatever he's planning to say." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Ashbourne said. "This concerns you directly. You deserve a voice in how it unfolds." The audience was scheduled for the following week, held within the palace's formal receiving hall, a space designed specifically for diplomatic negotiations between the kingdom and its neighboring territories. Alira dressed carefully that morning, choosing a deep green gown that carried none of the softness associated with her previous life within the pack, paired with a simple silver pendant Ashbourne had gifted her weeks earlier, a subtle symbol of the growing partnership between them. Draven arrived precisely on schedule, accompanied by 2 of his pack's senior advisors, his expression carrying a carefully controlled composure that nonetheless failed to fully mask the strain of recent months. Alira noticed immediately how much thinner he looked, dark circles shadowing his eyes in a way that spoke to sleepless nights, and mounting pressure from a pack growing increasingly unstable under his leadership. Ashbourne received him with formal, measured courtesy, offering neither warmth nor open hostility, simply the careful neutrality expected of a ruler receiving a diplomatic guest. Illyra sat beside Ashbourne, her posture composed despite the tension coiling tightly in her chest as Draven's gaze settled on her for the first time in months. "Thank you for granting this audience, Your Majesty," Draven began, his voice carrying the practiced formality of pact negotiations, though a slight tremor beneath the surface betrayed his underlying anxiety. "I've come to discuss the deteriorating relations between our territories, along with a proposal I believe could benefit us both." "I'm listening," Ashbourne said simply, offering no further encouragement. Draven glanced briefly at Illyra before continuing, clearly attempting to gauge her reaction, though her expression remained carefully neutral. "Since Illyra's departure, several of our trade partners have withdrawn their agreements, citing concerns about the pact's stability. I believe a renewed alliance between your kingdom and my pact, formalized through appropriate arrangements, could help restore confidence among our remaining partners." "What sort of arrangements did you have in mind?" Ashbourne asked, his tone giving nothing away. Draven hesitated, glancing once more toward Illyra before pressing forward. "I understand Illyra has found a place within your court. I don't intend to dispute that, given everything that transpired between us, but perhaps a formal trade agreement between our territories, independent of any personal bond, could help stabilize the region without requiring further complications." "You're asking for a trade alliance," Ashbourne clarified, "without offering anything of comparable value in return, given that your pact's standing has already deteriorated significantly since our last formal interactions." Draven's composure faltered slightly under the direct assessment, his jaw tightening in a way Illyra recognized immediately from their years together. "I'm offering the stability such an alliance would bring to the entire region, Your Majesty. Surely that carries value." "Regional stability is certainly valuable," Ashbourne agreed evenly. "But I have no particular interest in propping up a pact leadership whose own choices led directly to its current instability. If your trade partners have withdrawn their confidence, that reflects consequences you created through your own conduct, not circumstances my kingdom is obligated to remedy." The exchange grew increasingly tense as Draven pressed his case further, his careful diplomatic tone gradually giving way to something closer to open desperation. He argued the strategic value of a unified regional alliance, the mutual benefits of cooperation between neighboring territories, the risks of instability spreading beyond his own pact's borders if left unaddressed. Ashbourne listened to each argument with unwavering patience, offering measured responses that consistently exposed the weakness in Draven's position without ever raising his voice or losing his composed authority. Finally, visibly frustrated by his inability to secure any meaningful concession, Draven's carefully maintained diplomacy cracked entirely. "You're being unreasonable," he said, his voice sharpening with barely contained frustration. "I came here in good faith, seeking a reasonable arrangement, and you're refusing, simply because of personal matters that have nothing to do with regional stability." "I am being entirely reasonable," Ashbourne replied, his voice remaining perfectly calm despite Draven's rising agitation, a contrast that made the Alpha's frustration appear all the more undignified by comparison. "You built your pact's political standing on an alliance secured through deception. Now that the deception has been exposed, and the alliance withdrawn, as a direct consequence, you're asking my kingdom to simply replace what you lost, without addressing the underlying conduct that caused the loss in the first place. That isn't a reasonable request. It's an attempt to avoid accountability." Draven's face flushed with a mixture of anger and humiliation, his gaze flicking toward Illyra with something that briefly resembled accusation, as though her presence in this exchange somehow validated his frustration. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, his voice rising further. "This isn't just about me. Entire families within my pact depend on the stability those trade agreements provided. Are you truly willing to let them suffer over matters between myself and Illyra?" "The families within your pact are suffering because of decisions you made, Alpha Cole," Ashbourne said, his tone hardening slightly for the first time throughout the entire exchange, a subtle shift that nonetheless carried unmistakable authority. "Decisions that had nothing to do with regional stability and everything to do with your own choices regarding honesty and commitment. I understand the consequences extend beyond yourself, and I regret that innocent pack members bear that weight. But the solution to that problem lies in your own leadership, not in my kingdom quietly absorbing the costs of your mistakes." The room fell into tense silence following Ashbourne's response, Draven's advisors exchanging uneasy glances, clearly recognizing that their leader's approach had failed to secure the outcome they had hoped for. Draven himself stood rigid, his jaw clenched tightly, visibly struggling to maintain composure in the face of such direct, unwavering refusal. "This isn't over," he finally said, his voice tight with barely restrained frustration. "You may believe you've won something here today, Your Majesty, but underestimating the consequences of continued regional instability would be a mistake." The words carried an edge that made Alira's chest tighten with unease, though Ashbourne's expression remained entirely unmoved, his composure absolute even in the face of what sounded uncomfortably close to a veiled threat. "I don't underestimate consequences, Alpha Cole," Ashbourne said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made even Draven's advisors visibly straighten with sudden attention. "I simply don't respond well to attempts at intimidation, particularly when they're directed at securing benefits someone hasn't earned through honest conduct. I would advise considerable caution before pursuing whatever course of action that statement was intended to imply." Draven held Ashbourne's steady gaze for a long, tense moment, before finally looking away, the fight visibly draining from his posture as the reality of his position settled fully upon him. Without another word, he turned and departed the receiving hall, his advisors following quickly behind him, leaving behind a heavy silence that lingered long after the sound of their footsteps had faded from the corridor. Alira let out a slow breath she had not realized she was holding, her hands unclenching from where they had gripped the arms of her chair throughout the tense exchange. "That went about as well as I expected it might," she said quietly. Ashbourne turned toward her, his composed authority softening slightly now that the formal audience had concluded. "Are you all right? That couldn't have been easy to witness." "I'm fine," Alira said, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she genuinely meant it. Watching him try to manipulate the situation, and fail so completely, actually helped more than I expected. I spent so long believing his confidence meant strength. Seeing him without that confidence, desperate and grasping, it just confirms everything I already knew was true. "He won't simply let this go," Ashbourne said carefully. "That final statement, whatever he intended by it, wasn't an empty gesture. We should remain cautious in the coming weeks." Alira nodded slowly, though she found the warning carried less fear than it might have months earlier, back when Draven's authority and confidence had still held real power over her sense of safety. "Whatever he tries, we'll face it together. I'm not facing his desperation alone anymore." Ashbourne's expression softened further at her words, something warm and steady settling behind his composed authority. "No," he said quietly, "you won't." In the weeks following the tense audience at the kingdom's palace, Draven made good on the veiled threat he had issued before departing. Reports began reaching Ashbourne's advisors of rumors spreading among the region's smaller packs, rumors suggesting that Alira had fabricated evidence against her former mate out of jealousy, that her departure from the Packlands had been driven by personal ambition rather than genuine betrayal, and that her alliance with King Ashbourne represented nothing more than opportunistic political maneuvering on her part. Alira learned of these rumors from Nova, who had maintained careful contact with several trusted friends still residing within the Packlands territory. "They're saying you invented the whole thing," Nova told her one evening, clearly frustrated on her sister's behalf. "That you wanted out of the marriage and used Celine as a convenient excuse." Alira absorbed the news with a calm that surprised even herself. "I have proof, Nova. Messages, dates, everything undeniable. If Draven wants to test whether that evidence holds up to scrutiny, I'm more than willing to let it." "He's counting on people not asking to see the proof," Nova pointed out. "Rumors spread faster than careful investigation ever could." Ashbourne, upon learning of the spreading rumors, arrived at a similar conclusion, though his response carried the measured strategic thinking of a ruler well accustomed to managing regional politics. "We could simply ignore this," he told Alira during a private conversation in his study, "but doing so risks allowing the narrative to solidify unchallenged. I think it's time to address this directly and publicly, rather than allowing Draven's version of events to spread further." What did you have in mind? Elira asked. A joint council, Ashbourne said. Representatives from the Packlands, along with the surrounding territories affected by the trade instability, gathered in a neutral setting to formally address the circumstances surrounding your departure. I'll extend an invitation to Alpha Cole directly, framed as an opportunity to resolve the ongoing regional tension once and for all. You think he'll accept? He'll have to, Ashbourne said. Refusing would look like an admission of exactly what the rumors are trying to obscure, and frankly, given how much his pack's standing has already suffered, he can't afford to appear evasive in front of the very allies he's trying to win back. The joint council was scheduled for 3 weeks later, held once again within the neutral conference house near the kingdom's border, though this time expanded to accommodate a far larger gathering of pack representatives and dignitaries from across the region. Word of the upcoming council spread quickly, curiosity and speculation building steadily among the various territories as the date approached. Elira spent the weeks leading up to the council carefully organizing her evidence, working alongside Edmund, her family's trusted advisor, to ensure every message, every date, every detail, was presented with clarity and precision. She wanted no room left for doubt or misinterpretation once the proof was finally laid before the assembled representatives. On the morning of the council, Elira dressed in the same deep gray she had worn during her formal renouncement months earlier, a deliberate choice meant to convey seriousness rather than sentiment. Ashbourne accompanied her to the conference house, along with a small delegation from the kingdom, while Nova and Edmund traveled separately, carrying the carefully organized evidence that would form the foundation of Elira's testimony. The conference hall was packed by the time proceedings began, representatives from a dozen surrounding packs and territories filling the seats alongside kingdom dignitaries and Packlands officials. Draven sat at the front of the gathering, alongside his senior advisors, his expression carefully composed, though Elira could see the same underlying tension she had noticed during their previous encounter at the palace. Celine Marsh, Elira noted with some surprise, was also present, seated a short distance from Draven, among a small group of pack representatives, her expression notably uneasy as she glanced repeatedly toward the front of the hall. A neutral mediator, a respected elder from a distant territory unconnected to either the Packlands or the kingdom, opened the proceedings, outlining the purpose of the gathering as an opportunity to formally address the circumstances behind the regional trade instability and resolve any lingering disputes regarding the events that had led to it. Draven spoke first, offering a carefully worded statement that attempted to frame Elira's departure as a personal matter unrelated to broader questions of trustworthiness or leadership integrity. He acknowledged, vaguely, that his marriage had faced difficulties, but insisted the specifics were private matters that had been unfairly exaggerated and weaponized against him. When it was her turn to speak, Elira rose calmly, carrying the folder of organized evidence Edmund had helped her prepare. She addressed the assembled representatives directly, her voice steady and clear, despite the significant audience before her. I want to be plain about what happened, because rumors have spread that I fabricated a betrayal to justify a decision I had already made for other reasons, she began. That is not true, and I have brought clear evidence to demonstrate exactly what occurred. She proceeded to lay out the timeline methodically, beginning with the crowning ceremony where she had first witnessed Draven's private meeting with Celine, moving through the weeks of quiet observation that followed, and finally presenting the messages she had discovered, messages spanning more than a year, in which Draven had explicitly described his bond with Elira as politically necessary rather than genuine, and discussed plans to eventually separate from her once the alliance with her family had been fully secured. The hall fell into stunned silence as she read select excerpts aloud, careful to present the material factually, without embellishment, allowing the messages themselves to speak to the truth of the situation. Several representatives exchanged uneasy glances, clearly reconsidering their earlier assumptions based on the rumors that had reached them. Draven attempted to interject partway through her presentation, insisting the messages had been taken out of context, that private communications between old friends did not necessarily represent ongoing romantic involvement. But his protests grew increasingly weak as Elira continued presenting additional evidence, including dated records that clearly established a pattern of secretive meetings and continued communication that extended well beyond what could reasonably be characterized as simple friendship. It was Celine, ultimately, whose reaction did the most damage to Draven's remaining credibility. As the evidence mounted, and the assembled representatives' skepticism grew increasingly apparent, Celine rose abruptly from her seat, her composure completely unraveling under the weight of public scrutiny. "I can't sit here and let him pretend this was all some misunderstanding," she said, her voice trembling but growing steadier as she continued. "He told me the bond with Alira wasn't permanent. He told me repeatedly that once the alliance was secured, we would find a way to be together properly. I believed him, foolishly, for over a year." The hall erupted into murmurs at this unexpected confirmation, Draven's face draining of color, as his last remaining defense crumbled entirely in front of the very allies he had hoped to win back. Celine continued, her voice carrying a mixture of anger and humiliation as the full weight of her own poor judgment settled visibly upon her. "I'm not proud of my role in any of this," she admitted. "But I won't stand here and let him lie about it in front of everyone, especially not after everything I sacrificed believing his promises." The mediator called for order as the hall's murmurs grew louder, though the damage to Draven's credibility had already been thoroughly and publicly established. Several PAC representatives who had traveled to the council specifically to evaluate whether renewed trade agreements with the PAC lands remained advisable now exchanged grim, decisive glances, their earlier uncertainty replaced by clear conviction regarding the true nature of the situation. By the time the council session concluded, several hours later, the outcome had become unmistakably clear. Representatives from 3 separate territories formally announced their decision to maintain their withdrawal from trade agreements with the Packlands, citing concerns about leadership integrity that Draven's own conduct had thoroughly confirmed rather than dispelled. Even those territories that had remained neutral throughout the growing regional tension made clear their reluctance to deepen ties with a pack whose alpha had so publicly demonstrated a pattern of deception. Alira did not feel triumphant as the council session drew to its close, despite the thorough vindication her carefully presented evidence had achieved. She felt, instead, a quiet, steady sense of closure, the final resolution of a chapter in her life that had caused immense pain, but had ultimately led her toward something far more honest and secure. As the hall began to empty, Draven remained seated at the front, his posture slumped with the weight of total, public humiliation, his advisors offering quiet, uncertain words of support that seemed to carry little genuine conviction. Celine had already departed, disappearing quickly through a side exit, unwilling to face further scrutiny from the assembled crowd. Ashbourne approached Alira as she gathered her papers, his expression carrying quiet pride beneath its usual composed authority. "You handled that with remarkable grace," he said quietly. "I know that couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," Alira admitted. "But it needed to happen. The truth needed to be heard clearly, without room for doubt or manipulation." "It was," Ashbourne confirmed, "thoroughly and unmistakably." As they walked together toward the conference house's main entrance, Nova falling into step beside them, Alira allowed herself a final glance back toward the now emptying hall, toward the man who had once crowned her with such false promise, now sitting alone amid the wreckage of alliances he had spent years building and had ultimately destroyed through his own choices. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall. Exactly. But she felt, finally and completely, free of the weight his deception had carried in her life for far too long. Spring arrived early that year within the kingdom, the palace gardens blooming weeks ahead of schedule, filling the courtyards with soft color and gentle fragrance that seemed to mirror the quiet transformation that had taken place in Alira's life over the past several months. It had been nearly a year since the crowning ceremony that had once felt like the beginning of everything she wanted, and had instead become the moment that revealed how little of it had ever been real. In the months following the joint council, Alira had settled fully into her role within Ashbourne's kingdom, no longer as a guest navigating unfamiliar customs, but as an active, respected partner in the kingdom's governance. Her insight into trade negotiations and diplomatic relations had proven invaluable, her years managing PAC affairs translating naturally into the broader political landscape she now helped shape alongside Ashbourne. Their relationship, too, had grown steadily during that time, evolving gradually from the honest, practical alliance Ashbourne had first proposed, into something Alira had not expected to feel again so fully after everything Draven's betrayal had cost her. It had not happened suddenly, nor dramatically, but through the accumulation of countless small moments, quiet conversations shared over evening meals, careful consideration offered during difficult decisions, steady support, extended, without ever requiring her to perform gratitude or affection she did not genuinely feel. She had fallen in love with him slowly, she realized one evening, as they walked together through the blooming palace gardens, watching the last light of sunset settle over the quiet fountain at its center. Not with the desperate, hopeful intensity she remembered from the earliest days of her bond with Draven, but with something steadier, more grounded, built entirely on honesty rather than performance. "You're quiet tonight," Ashbourne observed, noticing the thoughtful expression she carried as they walked. "Just thinking," Alira said, offering a small smile, "about how different everything feels now, compared to a year ago." "Good different, I hope," Ashbourne said, though there was genuine warmth beneath the light teasing in his tone. "Very good different," Alira confirmed. "I keep thinking about how frightened I was back then, of losing everything by walking away from Draven, and instead, I found something so much more solid than what I gave up." Ashbourne stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his expression carrying a seriousness that told Alira something significant was coming, even before he spoke. "Alira, I've valued our partnership more than I know how to properly express. What began as a practical alliance has become something I never expected to feel again, after so many years focused entirely on kingdom duties. I'd like to make that feeling permanent, if you'll have me. Not as a political arrangement this time, but simply because I want to build my life alongside yours." As he withdrew a small, elegant ring from his pocket, offering it to her with the same steady honesty that had first drawn her attention at the summit so many months earlier. Alira felt tears gather unexpectedly in her eyes, though these carried none of the pain that had accompanied her tears during the darkest weeks following Draven's betrayal. These were tears of genuine, overwhelming happiness. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Ashbourne, I want that too, more than I know how to properly express as well." Their wedding, held several weeks later, within the kingdom's grand cathedral, carried none of the political calculation that had shadowed her crowning ceremony so many months earlier. Representatives from across the region attended, many of the same territories that had withdrawn their trust from Draven's leadership, now eager to celebrate the genuine partnership forming between Alira and King Ashbourne. Nova stood proudly at her sister's side throughout the ceremony, along with Grace, the young pack member whose careful information had first helped confirm Alira's suspicions so many months earlier, now serving within the kingdom's own staff, after choosing to leave the increasingly unstable Packlands territory. Alira wore white again that day, though this gown carried none of the naive hope that had defined her first crowning. Instead, it represented something earned through difficult truth rather than accepted through convenient blindness, a partnership chosen freely rather than assumed out of obligation or political necessity. As the ceremony concluded and Ashbourne placed a new crown upon her head, this one representing her position as queen rather than Luna, Alira felt none of the hollow uncertainty that had shadowed her first crowning. This crown felt solid, earned, built on a foundation of honesty that she trusted completely, having watched it proven consistently through every difficult moment they had faced together over the past several months. News of Draven's continued struggles reached her occasionally, through Nova's careful monitoring of Packland's affairs, though Alira found she thought of him less and less as the months passed, her attention fully absorbed by the genuine happiness she had built within her new life. His pack continued struggling to rebuild the trade relationships lost following the Joint Council's revelations, his leadership increasingly questioned by pack members who had grown disillusioned by the extended instability his choices had caused. Celine, Alira learned, had left the pack entirely shortly after the council session, unwilling to continue facing the scrutiny and consequences of her own role in the deception. Alira felt no particular satisfaction in these developments, nor any lingering bitterness that required such news to feel meaningful. She had built something far more valuable in her new life than any sense of vindication regarding her old one could provide. On a quiet evening several months after her wedding, Alira stood once again at the window of her private chambers, now shared fully with Ashbourne as her husband and partner, rather than simply her host, watching the same peaceful garden that had greeted her upon her very first arrival within the kingdom. So much had changed since that day, transformed through difficult choices, painful truths, and ultimately, a partnership built on exactly the honesty she had once believed impossible to find. Ashbourne joined her at the window, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders, as they watched the moonlight settle over the quiet garden below. "Regrets?" he asked softly, a question he occasionally posed, always with genuine curiosity rather than insecurity, wanting to ensure she never felt trapped by choices made in difficult circumstances. "None," Elira answered, leaning into his steady presence with complete confidence. "Everything that happened, all of it, led me here. To this, to you. I'm grateful for that path, difficult as it clearly was," Ashbourne said quietly. "Though I wish it hadn't cost you so much pain to find your way here. The pain taught me what I actually needed," Elira said. "Not a crown built on convenient appearances, but a partnership built on truth. I wouldn't trade that lesson, even knowing what it cost to learn it." They stood together in comfortable silence for a long while, watching the garden below settle into the quiet stillness of night, two people who had each, in their own way, learned the value of honest partnership over convenient pretending. Whatever challenges the future might bring, Elira felt certain, deeply and completely, that she would face them from a foundation far more solid than the one she had once believed was enough. The Luna crown she had once worn with such naive hope now belonged entirely to her past, a symbol of lessons learned rather than dreams fulfilled. The crown she wore now, chosen freely and built on genuine truth, represented something far more meaningful. It represented a life finally, completely, her own,